There's a thought you've been avoiding. You know it's there. It sits in the back of your mind during quiet moments. When you're alone. When the distractions fade and you're left with just yourself. The thought is this: what if everything you believe is wrong? Not wrong in small ways. Not a few incorrect facts or outdated opinions. But fundamentally, structurally wrong. What if the entire framework through which you understand yourself and the world is built on assumptions you never chose to examine? Socrates walked through Athens with this question burning in his mind. And he didn't keep it to himself. He spread it like a virus. Person by person. Conversation by conversation. He would approach respected citizens, politicians, generals, poets, craftsmen, and ask them simple questions about their expertise. What is courage? What is justice? How do you know what you claim to know? And one by one, these people discovered something terrifying. They didn't actually know what they thought they knew. Their confidence was unfounded. Their certainty was hollow. They had built entire careers, entire identities, on foundations they had never questioned. And they hated Socrates for showing them this. Eventually, they killed him for it. But before we talk about why they killed him, we need to understand what he was really doing. Because Socratic questioning isn't what most people think it is. It's not a method for finding truth. It's a method for destroying certainty. And there's a difference. A crucial difference. One that most people miss. You see, when you question someone's beliefs deeply enough, systematically enough, you don't just challenge their ideas. You challenge the psychological structures they use to maintain a stable sense of self. You threaten the narratives they tell themselves about who they are and why their life matters. And humans will do almost anything to protect those narratives. Right now, as you listen to this, your brain is engaged in a constant process of reality construction. You think you're perceiving the world directly. But you're not. What you're experiencing is a simulation. A model built by your nervous system based on sensory data, prior expectations, and evolutionary programming designed to keep you alive. Not to show you truth. To keep you alive. Those are not the same thing. Your brain is filtering out most of reality right now. It has to. There's too much information coming in through your senses for conscious processing. So it selects. It prioritizes. It makes millions of decisions every second about what's important enough to bring to your awareness and what can be ignored. And those decisions aren't neutral. They're shaped by your past experiences. Your current emotional state. Your unconscious fears and desires. Your need to maintain a coherent sense of identity. You're not seeing reality. You're seeing a heavily edited version of reality designed to confirm what you already believe. This is called confirmation bias. And it's not a flaw in your thinking. It's how thinking works. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly generating hypotheses about what's going to happen next. And it pays more attention to information that confirms its predictions than information that contradicts them. Because contradictory information is dangerous. It means the model is wrong. And if the model is wrong, you might make a fatal mistake. So your brain protects you from contradictory information. It filters it out. It reinterprets it. It finds ways to dismiss it so you can maintain your existing worldview. And you don't even notice this happening. That's the insidious part. The filtering happens before conscious awareness.
By the time you become aware of a thought or perception, it's already been shaped by unconscious processes you have no direct access to.
Socrates understood this. Not in neuroscientific terms, obviously.
But he understood that people don't examine their beliefs because their survival, psychological survival, depends on not examining them. When he questioned people, he was essentially attacking their psychological immune system. The defense mechanisms they had built up over years to protect themselves from uncertainty.
And those defense mechanisms are powerful. Let me show you how they work. Imagine someone believes something deeply. Let's say they believe they're a good person. This isn't just an abstract proposition for them.
It's foundational to their self-concept, their sense of worth,
their ability to look at themselves in the mirror. Now imagine presenting them with evidence that contradicts this belief.
Evidence that they've caused harm, that their actions have had negative consequences they didn't intend or acknowledge.
What happens? Do they rationally update their belief based on the new evidence? Sometimes. If they're psychologically secure enough. If the evidence isn't too threatening.
If they have support structures in place to help them process the information.
But often, they don't. Instead, they activate defense mechanisms. Denial. That didn't really happen. The evidence is flawed. The source is biased. Rationalization. I had good reasons. The context justifies it. Anyone would have done the same thing. Projection. Other people are worse. Why are you attacking me specifically? What about all the good things I've done?
These aren't conscious strategies.
They're automatic. They happen faster than thought.
Your unconscious mind detects a threat to your self-concept and deploys countermeasures before you even realize what's happening.
And here's what's truly fascinating.
Once these defense mechanisms are activated, they feel like rational thinking. You experience them as logical analysis,
critical evaluation, reasonable skepticism. You don't feel like you're defending yourself. You feel like you're seeing through faulty arguments. This is why Socratic questioning is so dangerous. Not because it's logically complex, but because it bypasses these defenses by making the person do the work themselves. Socrates didn't tell people they were wrong. He asked them questions. Simple questions.
Questions that seemed innocuous at first but gradually revealed contradictions in their thinking.
And because the person was generating their own doubts, their own recognition of inconsistency, the normal defense mechanisms had nothing to attack. There was no external enemy. Just their own mind, confronting itself. This is psychologically devastating. When you realize through your own reasoning that you've been wrong about something fundamental, you can't dismiss it the way you could dismiss external criticism. You can't blame the messenger. You are the messenger.
And this creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. A deeply uncomfortable state where you hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously.
I am a good person. I have done bad things. I am intelligent. I believe things for bad reasons. I am in control of my life.
I am driven by unconscious forces I don't understand.
The mind can't tolerate cognitive dissonance for long. It creates anxiety, confusion,
a sense of internal fragmentation. So it has to resolve the dissonance.
Either by changing the belief or by finding a way to reconcile the contradiction.
And this is where things get interesting.
Because changing a core belief is extremely difficult. It requires restructuring your entire self-concept, reinterpreting your past, acknowledging that you were wrong about something you were certain about. Most people can't do this. Or won't. The psychological cost is too high. So instead, they reconcile the contradiction in ways that preserve their self-image. They compartmentalize. Create mental barriers between incompatible beliefs so they never have to confront them simultaneously. They minimize. Okay, maybe I was wrong about this one small thing, but that doesn't invalidate everything else I believe. They deflect. Everyone has contradictions. Everyone is a hypocrite. This doesn't make me special or particularly flawed. These strategies work. They reduce the anxiety of cognitive dissonance. They allow you to continue functioning. But they don't get you closer to truth. They get you further from it. Because you've now added another layer of self-deception on top of the original false belief. You're not just wrong. You're wrong about being wrong. And the deeper you go into this pattern, the harder it becomes to find your way out. This is what Socrates was trying to show people. That most of what they called knowledge was actually a complex structure of defended ignorance. Beliefs they held onto not because they were true but because admitting they were false would be too psychologically costly. And he was right. But he underestimated how much people need those defenses. How essential they are to psychological stability. Because here's the thing. If you question everything, if you systematically dismantle all your certainties, you eventually reach a point of total epistemic vertigo. You don't know what's true. You don't know who you are. You don't know what matters or why. And that state, that condition of radical uncertainty, is not enlightenment. It's a kind of madness. The ancient Greeks had a word for it. Aporia. It means being at an impasse. A state where all paths forward are blocked. Where every answer generates new questions and there's no stable ground to stand on. Socrates believed aporia was necessary. That you had to pass through it to reach genuine wisdom. But what if you don't pass through it? What if you get stuck there? What if questioning everything doesn't lead to wisdom but to paralysis? There's a modern psychological condition that resembles this. It's called depersonalization-derealization disorder. People with this condition feel disconnected from themselves and their surroundings. The world seems unreal. Dreamlike. They observe their own thoughts and actions as if from outside themselves. It's profoundly disturbing. And while it's usually triggered by trauma or extreme stress, there's evidence that it can also be triggered by too much introspection. Too much questioning of basic assumptions about self and reality. When you question whether you're really you, whether your memories are real, whether your perceptions are accurate, whether anything you experience is what it seems to be, you can destabilize the very mechanisms that create a coherent sense of self. And once those mechanisms are destabilized, putting them back together is extremely difficult. This is why most philosophical traditions that emphasize questioning also emphasize grounding practices. Meditation. Community. Ritual. Physical discipline. Things that anchor you in embodied experience rather than pure thought. Because pure thought, unmoored from body and community and shared reality, can spiral into solipsism. Into a closed loop where you question the validity of questioning itself and end up unable to think anything with confidence. Socrates didn't have these grounding practices. Or if he did, they weren't enough. He spent his life questioning, examining, probing.
And while he remained functional, while he maintained relationships and participated in society, there's something almost inhuman about his approach.
He claimed to know nothing, to be wise only in his recognition of his own ignorance.
But he also claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living.
Think about the arrogance of that statement, the absoluteness of it.
He's essentially saying that most people who live unreflective lives, who accept inherited beliefs without question, who find meaning in tradition and community and simple pleasures, their lives aren't worth living.
That's not wisdom. That's contempt disguised as philosophy.
And it reveals something important about the shadow side of Socratic questioning.
It can become a tool for feeling superior,
for looking down on people who haven't done the work of examination.
But what if that work isn't accessible to everyone?
What if some people lack the intellectual capacity, the emotional stability, the material security, or the social support to engage in radical self-examination?
Are their lives less valuable? Less meaningful? Or is Socrates revealing his own bias? His own need to justify a life spent in endless questioning by devaluing lives lived differently?
This is the kind of question Socrates himself should have asked but apparently didn't.
And it points to a deeper problem with making questioning itself a virtue. Because questioning can become an identity, a way of defining yourself against others, against the unquestioning masses.
And once it becomes an identity, it stops being a tool for discovering truth and starts being a tool for maintaining a sense of superiority.
You've probably encountered people like this. People who pride themselves on being skeptical, on questioning everything, on not accepting easy answers. And on the surface, this seems admirable. But listen closely to how they talk. Notice what gives them pleasure. Often, it's not the discovery of truth. It's the act of showing someone else they're wrong. The intellectual dominance. The subtle humiliation of revealing someone's faulty reasoning. They're not actually seeking wisdom. They're seeking validation.
Proof that they're smarter, more rational, more enlightened than others.
And they're using Socratic questioning as a weapon to obtain that validation. This is what happens when you don't examine your own motivations for questioning.
When you turn the method outward but never fully inward.
You become what Nietzsche called a last man.
Someone who has deconstructed all values but hasn't created any new ones.
Who knows what everything is not but doesn't know what anything is. And this brings us to something crucial.
Something that most discussions of Socratic method miss entirely.
Questioning destroys.
It tears down.
It reveals inconsistencies and contradictions. But it doesn't build. It doesn't create. It doesn't give you anything to replace what it takes away. And humans need something to build on. Some foundation. Some set of provisional truths they can use to navigate reality. If you take away all certainty, if you make everything questionable, you don't get wise philosophers. You get people who can't make decisions, who are paralyzed by infinite regress, who can always find another reason to doubt, another angle to question, another possibility to consider. And while they're questioning, life is happening. Opportunities are passing. Relationships are forming and dissolving. The world is moving forward whether you've resolved your epistemic uncertainties or not. This is what the Stoics understood that Socrates seemed to miss. That philosophy isn't just about understanding. It's about action.
Marcus Aurelius didn't spend his time endlessly questioning what virtue was. He tried to practice it.
Imperfectly. With full awareness that his understanding was incomplete. But he acted anyway.
Because action can't wait for perfect knowledge. And perfect knowledge is impossible.
You act based on the best understanding you have available. And then you adjust based on feedback. Based on consequences. Based on new information. This is a fundamentally different approach from Socratic questioning. It's iterative rather than foundational. Pragmatic rather than absolute. And it avoids the trap of infinite questioning by accepting that some axioms have to be taken as given. Not because they're provably true, but because you need somewhere to start. You need to assume that your perceptions are generally reliable. That other people exist. That cause and effect operate consistently. That reason is a valid tool for understanding reality. These assumptions might be wrong. You can certainly question them. And philosophers have, extensively. But questioning them doesn't change the fact that you need them to function. So you hold them provisionally. You remain open to revising them if better alternatives emerge. But you don't paralyze yourself by insisting on absolute proof before you accept anything. This is practical wisdom. And it's different from the kind of wisdom Socrates claimed to pursue. Socrates wanted absolute clarity. Complete understanding. Or at least, complete understanding of his own ignorance. But maybe complete understanding isn't possible. Maybe all understanding is partial, provisional, perspectival. Maybe the goal isn't to eliminate all uncertainty but to act well despite uncertainty. And maybe questioning everything is actually a way of avoiding this harder challenge. Because if you're always questioning, you never have to commit. You never have to take a stand. You never have to risk being wrong in a way that matters. You can always retreat into another layer of analysis. Another round of questioning. Another level of abstraction. And while you're up there in the realm of pure thought, you're safe. Protected from the messy consequences of actually living a life. This is the seductive danger of philosophy divorced from practice. It feels like you're doing something important. Pursuing truth. Expanding your understanding. But you might just be avoiding life. Avoiding the vulnerability of commitment. The uncertainty of relationship. The responsibility of choice. Because once you make a choice, once you commit to a belief or a value or a course of action, you're exposed. You can be wrong. You can fail. You can be criticized. But if you never commit, if you're always questioning, always reconsidering, always keeping your options open, you're safe. Safely paralyzed. But safe. Now, I'm not saying questioning is bad. It's essential. But it has to be balanced with action. With commitment. With the willingness to build something even on uncertain foundations. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question we can ask about Socratic questioning. What is it for? What's the purpose? If it's just for its own sake, if questioning is the end rather than a means, then it becomes a kind of intellectual narcissism. A way of feeling profound without actually doing anything. But if it's a tool, a method for clearing away false beliefs so you can see reality more clearly, then it has to serve something beyond itself. It has to serve your ability to live well. To make good decisions. To create meaning. To reduce suffering in yourself and others. And that requires knowing when to stop questioning and start acting. The Stoics had a practice for this. They called it the dichotomy of control. Some things are within your control. Your thoughts, your reactions, your choices, your efforts. Some things are outside your control. Other people's opinions, external events, outcomes, the past, the future. The practice is to focus your energy on what you can control and accept what you can't. This seems simple. But it's actually quite radical. Because it means letting go of the need to understand everything. To control everything. To have certainty about everything. You acknowledge that reality is complex. That your understanding is limited. That you're going to be wrong about many things. And you act anyway. Based on what you can control. With wisdom and virtue as your guides. Not perfect wisdom. Not absolute virtue. But the best approximation you can manage given your current understanding. And then you observe the results. You learn. You adjust. This is a living philosophy. One that engages with reality rather than retreating from it. And it requires a different relationship to questioning than the one Socrates modeled. You question to clarify. To remove obstacles. To identify false assumptions that are leading you astray. But you don't question as an end in itself. You question in service of living better. And once you've questioned enough to have a workable understanding, you act on that understanding. You test it against reality. Because reality gives you feedback that pure thought never can. If you believe something and act on it, you discover whether it works. Whether it produces the results you intended. Whether it's compatible with other beliefs you hold. And if it doesn't work, if the results are bad, if contradictions emerge, then you question again. You refine your understanding. You try a different approach. This is how you actually learn. Not through pure reasoning in isolation, but through the interaction of thought and action. Theory and practice. Questioning and testing. And this brings us to something neuroscience has discovered that the ancient philosophers could only intuit. Your brain doesn't learn primarily through conscious reasoning. It learns through prediction error. Every time you predict what's going to happen and you're wrong, your brain updates its models. It adjusts its expectations. It modifies the neural pathways that generated the faulty prediction. This is happening constantly, mostly unconsciously. Your brain is running millions of tiny experiments every second. Predicting what you're going to see, hear, feel, taste, smell. And when reality doesn't match the prediction, it learns. But here's the crucial part. This learning happens through engagement with reality. Through action and feedback. If you just sit and think, if you only question and analyze without testing your ideas against the world, your brain doesn't get the prediction error signal it needs to learn. You can think yourself into all kinds of conclusions. Build elaborate theories. Construct detailed models of how you believe things work. But until you test them, until you act on them and see what happens, you don't actually know if they're true. This is why armchair philosophers, people who spend all their time in abstract reasoning without practical engagement, often develop ideas that seem logically coherent but don't work in practice. They've optimized for internal consistency rather than external validity. Their ideas fit together nicely. But they don't fit reality. And they don't know this because they've never tested them. Socrates did test his ideas, in a way. Through dialogue. through engagement with others.
But he never really changed his approach based on feedback.
People told him his questioning was destructive, that it was undermining social cohesion, that it was corrupting young people by teaching them to disrespect authority and tradition.
And he dismissed these concerns. He maintained that his questioning was necessary, that the examined life was the only worthwhile life. He never seriously considered that maybe his method had limitations, that maybe it was appropriate for some contexts but not others, that maybe not everyone needed or benefited from radical questioning. He became attached to his identity as the questioner, the gadfly of Athens, the man who knows he knows nothing. And that attachment, that rigidity, is what ultimately got him killed.
Because he wouldn't compromise, wouldn't moderate his approach,
wouldn't acknowledge that his actions had consequences beyond his individual pursuit of truth.
This is a form of blindness.
And it's particularly ironic in someone who prided himself on seeing through illusions. He could see through other people's false certainties, but he couldn't see through his own attachment to questioning. And this reveals something important about the shadow side of any practice, any method, any approach to life. Whatever you identify with becomes a blind spot. If you identify as a questioner, you'll question everything except the value of questioning.
If you identify as rational, you'll rationalize everything except your attachment to rationality.
If you identify as someone who sees through illusions, you'll fail to see the illusions inherent in that very identity. This is what Jung called the shadow. The parts of yourself you can't see because they're too close, too integral to your sense of self. And everyone has a shadow. No amount of self-examination eliminates it. You just become more sophisticated at hiding it from yourself.
This is perhaps the deepest danger of questioning everything. Not that it leads to uncertainty, but that it creates the illusion that you've transcended your own biases and limitations, that you've achieved some kind of objective viewpoint, a view from nowhere. But there is no view from nowhere. You're always looking from somewhere, from a particular perspective, with particular blind spots. And the more convinced you are that you've eliminated your blind spots, the bigger they actually are. This is why the wisest people aren't the ones who claim to have questioned everything. They're the ones who remain humble about what they can't see, who acknowledge that their understanding is limited, that they're probably wrong about many things, that there are perspectives they haven't considered and can't even imagine. This kind of humility isn't weakness. It's realism. It's the recognition that you're a finite being trying to understand an infinite reality, that your brain is a limited instrument shaped by evolution to solve specific survival problems, not to comprehend ultimate truth. And once you accept this, once you really internalize it, you can stop trying to achieve impossible certainty and focus instead on something more valuable. Practical wisdom. The ability to navigate life skillfully despite uncertainty. This requires a different set of capacities than Socratic questioning develops. It requires emotional intelligence, the ability to read people, situations, contexts, to sense what's needed in a particular moment beyond what logic would dictate. It requires embodied awareness, being present in your physical experience rather than lost in abstract thought. It requires ethical sensitivity, the capacity to recognize how your actions affect others, even when you can't fully predict or understand those effects. And it requires courage, the willingness to act without guarantee of success, To commit without complete understanding.
To live with the anxiety of uncertainty rather than retreating into endless analysis.
These capacities aren't developed through questioning alone. They're developed through engagement, through relationship, through trial and error, through making mistakes and learning from them, through living. And this is what a purely Socratic approach misses. Life isn't a logical problem to be solved. It's a complex, dynamic process to be navigated.
And navigation requires different skills than analysis.
You have to be able to read the currents, sense the weather, adjust course based on changing conditions. You can't navigate by pure logic. You have to integrate information from multiple sources. Reason and intuition, analysis and feeling, past experience and present perception. And you have to act quickly, often without complete information, because the moment is passing and if you wait too long for certainty you'll miss the opportunity. This is the wisdom of the Stoics.
Of Marcus Aurelius writing in his journal, not elaborate philosophical treatises, but notes to himself about how to act rightly in difficult circumstances. How to be patient with annoying people. How to accept setbacks without becoming bitter. How to maintain integrity when it would be easier to compromise. These are practical questions. Questions about how to live. And they can't be answered through pure reasoning. You have to experiment. Try approaches. See what works. Adjust based on results. And this requires a kind of flexibility that Socratic questioning, at least as Socrates practiced it, doesn't encourage.
Because Socrates was looking for universal definitions, eternal truths,
principles that apply in all times and places.
But what if reality isn't like that? What if truth is contextual? What if the right answer depends on the situation, the people involved, the specific circumstances?
Then rigid adherence to universal principles becomes a liability.
You need to be able to adapt. To respond to what's actually happening rather than what you think should be happening based on abstract principles. This is what Aristotle understood with his concept of phronesis. Practical wisdom. It's not about knowing universal rules.
It's about knowing how to apply principles appropriately in specific situations.
When to be firm and when to be flexible. When to speak and when to remain silent. When to question and when to accept. These aren't things you can determine through logic alone. You need experience, judgment, a feel for the situation. And you develop that feel by paying attention, by being present, by engaging with life fully rather than observing it from a distance.
This is where we need to bring together the different threads we've been exploring.
Questioning is essential. But it's not sufficient.
You need to question your assumptions, your beliefs, your certainties. You need to examine whether you're living according to your actual values or just following inherited scripts.
But you also need to build, to create, to commit. And that means accepting that your foundations are provisional, that you're building on uncertainty, that you might be wrong, but building anyway.
Because the alternative is paralysis. The alternative is spending your entire life in preparation, in analysis, in questioning, and never actually living.
And that would be the ultimate irony.
To spend so much time examining life that you forget to live it.
So here's what I want you to consider. What if the goal isn't to question everything? What if the goal is to question the right things? The beliefs that are actually limiting you. The assumptions that are causing you to suffer unnecessarily. The certainties that are preventing you from seeing reality clearly. But not to question everything indiscriminately.
Not to tear down every structure until you're left with nothing.
Because you need structure. You need beliefs.
You need values and commitments and relationships built on trust.
You just need them to be chosen rather than inherited. Examined rather than assumed. Held lightly rather than rigidly. And this is a subtle but crucial difference. It's the difference between nihilism and flexibility. Nihilism says nothing means anything, so nothing matters. Flexibility says meanings are constructed, so we're free to construct them wisely. Nihilism leads to despair or apathy. Flexibility leads to agency and creativity.
And the way you avoid nihilism while maintaining intellectual honesty is through commitment.
Provisional commitment. Commitment that acknowledges its own contingency but commits anyway. I'm going to act as if these values matter. As if this relationship is worth investing in. As if this work is meaningful. Not because I've proven beyond all doubt that these things are objectively true. But because I've examined them carefully, they resonate with my deepest sense of what's important, and I'm choosing to build my life around them. And I'm willing to revise that choice if new information emerges. If my understanding changes. If I discover I was wrong. But for now, in this moment, with the understanding I currently have, I'm committing. This is how you integrate Socratic questioning with Stoic practice. You use questioning to clear away false beliefs. To identify contradictions. To refine your understanding. And then you use what you've learned to guide your action. To shape your character. To live in accordance with your chosen values. Not perfectly. You'll fail regularly. You'll discover new areas where your thinking is unclear or your behavior is inconsistent. And when you do, you question again. You examine. You adjust. But you don't let the questioning prevent you from living. From engaging. From committing. Because commitment isn't the opposite of wisdom. It's the expression of wisdom. It's saying, I've examined this as carefully as I can. I've considered the alternatives. I've acknowledged the uncertainties. And this is what I'm choosing. Not forever. Not with absolute certainty. But for now. As the best option available to me given my current understanding. And then you live with the consequences of that choice. You pay attention to what happens. You learn from the results. And that learning feeds back into your questioning. Your next round of examination. This is how you turn questioning from a destructive force into a constructive one. You don't question to tear down. You question to rebuild better. You don't question to prove everyone wrong. You question to find what's actually right, or at least less wrong. You don't question to feel superior. You question to become more capable of living well. And living well means different things in different contexts. For different people. At different stages of life. There's no universal template. No single answer that works for everyone. Which means you can't outsource this work. You can't just adopt someone else's answers, even Socrates' answers, and expect them to fit your life. You have to do the work yourself. The questioning. The examining. The choosing. And you have to live with the anxiety of knowing you might be getting it wrong. But that anxiety,
that uncertainty, it's not a problem to be solved.
It's a condition to be accepted. Because you're human. Finite. Limited. Operating with incomplete information in a complex, unpredictable world. And humans in that condition don't need perfect certainty. They need courage, wisdom, flexibility, compassion for themselves and others who are struggling with the same fundamental uncertainties. And when you develop those qualities, when you learn to act wisely despite uncertainty, you achieve something more valuable than the kind of knowledge Socrates was seeking. You achieve the ability to live well, to reduce suffering, to create meaning, to contribute something valuable to the world. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've figured out enough. Enough to take the next step, to make the next choice, to show up for the next moment, and then the next one, and the next one, until there are no more moments. Until the questioning ends, not because you've found all the answers but because you've run out of time. And when you reach that point, when you look back on your life, the question won't be how much you knew. It will be how well you lived. Whether you engaged fully. Whether you loved deeply. Whether you contributed meaningfully. Whether you had the courage to build something despite the uncertainty. To commit to people and values and projects even though you couldn't be sure. To question enough to live consciously. But not so much that you forgot to live. That's the balance. That's the integration. That's what it means to take the Socratic method seriously without letting it destroy you. You question. You examine. You refine your understanding. And then you live. You act. You engage. Knowing you're probably wrong about many things. But trying anyway. Because trying, failing, learning, adjusting, that's not a flaw in the human condition. That's what the human condition is. And once you accept that, once you stop fighting it and start working with it, you discover something remarkable. The anxiety doesn't go away. The uncertainty doesn't resolve. The questions don't stop. But they stop being obstacles. They become part of the process. Part of being awake. Part of being fully human. And you realize that Socrates was both right and wrong. Right that the examined life is valuable. That questioning your assumptions is essential. That most people live on autopilot, following scripts they never chose. But wrong that examination alone is sufficient. That questioning is more important than living. That the unexamined life is not worth living. Because there are people living beautiful, meaningful lives who never question in the Socratic sense. Who live by intuition, tradition, feeling. Who trust their experience more than their analysis. And their lives have value. Deep value. Not because they've examined everything. But because they've engaged fully with what's in front of them. They've loved. They've created. They've contributed. Maybe not with perfect understanding. But with whole hearts. And that matters. That counts. So the real question isn't whether to question. It's what you're questioning for. If you're questioning to avoid life, to feel superior, to maintain a safe distance from vulnerability, then it's not making you wiser. It's making you smaller. But if you're questioning to live better, to see more clearly, to reduce suffering, to contribute more skillfully, then it's valuable. Essential, even. Just not sufficient on its own. You need both. Question and commitment. Analysis and action. Understanding and engagement. And the balance between them isn't fixed. It shifts based on context, circumstances, your current state. Sometimes you need to question more. To examine. To slow down and think carefully. Sometimes you need to act more. To trust your intuition. To commit despite uncertainty.
Learning to sense which is needed when, that's wisdom.
Not the kind of wisdom that comes from having all the answers.
The kind that comes from knowing how to navigate without them. From being comfortable enough with uncertainty that you can act decisively anyway.
From trusting your judgment even while questioning it. From committing fully even while holding lightly. These sound like contradictions. And they are. But they're the contradictions inherent in being human. In being conscious enough to question but finite enough that you can't answer. In being self-aware enough to see your limitations but needing to act as if you're capable anyway. In knowing you're probably wrong about many things but having to choose as if you're right. This is the human condition. This paradox. This tension. And you don't resolve it by coming down on one side or the other. You live in the middle. In the creative tension between knowing and not knowing. Between certainty and doubt. Between commitment and flexibility. And you develop the capacity to hold that tension without collapsing it.